So, Chris, my name is Stephen McCann. I'm a graduate student in the MArch program at University of Texas. And then I'm the student interviewer, so I interview the lecturers to have a more casual conversation about architecture. So, and then, so we talked, or you had your lecture before our interview. And normally I try to interview before just because then, you know, all my questions don't get answered in the interview. So I'm having to audible, and I'll ask some more questions based on your lecture.
Sure.
And then you you kind of got into your origin story in with Penda and Precht and your founding and your move to Austria. You moved back to Austria, so we can just jump right in. I mean, I think my first question from your lecture is that of context. And so looking at BERT or farmhouse, we have these two speculative projects that necessarily don't have a site to begin with. And I'm just curious, in these speculative projects, where does site come into play for you, and where does context come into play?
Yeah. So I think that site comes in pretty early, I think in the beginning, but not a specific site. I think a site that could be the right one comes in. So for example, for BERT, it was something that is off the grid. So this one was from the beginning clear. I think also BERT, the project BERT is conceptualized like a tree. So you have your tree trunk where circulation and the bathrooms and all the wiring and water is inside, and then you have the tree branches with the rooms and the bedrooms and all of this. And so it is like a tree, and it also should be amongst the trees then built. So this one was really clear from the beginning, but we didn't have a specific site where this parcel in the forest would be. I think we leave then in the design process some open question. For example, the coloring of the shingles was one of these questions, right? So if it would be in a forest where mainly large trees would be, then it would have a different coloring of the shingles than in a forest in a fir forest. So where this one is now, there are a lot of firs. So we chose a kind of wood that after some time, it weathers and it becomes completely gray, like the tree trunks of a fir. So like these kind of stuff, this is still a bit open before a client comes in. Right. But I think in the beginning there's an idea of the site. But the real site then comes with the client, and I think that's actually also the case with the farmhouse. In my idea, the farmhouse would have been fantastic for a site in Beijing. I think that would have fit perfectly, right? To be really a beacon of sustainability and bringing nature into a polluted surrounding. I think that would have been a really strong and significant message. As well, in China, for example, there is now the case that the city is drawing a lot of people, and that there are a lot of and on the countryside there are a lot more technology that takes on the workers from farmers. So a lot of farmers are actually moving towards cities to find jobs. So I think there could be created this kind of vertical farmer with the knowledge that a lot of these farmers already have, right? How to grow vegetables, and so this one would have been a perfect story, I think. But if a client has a different city with a really a site that fits, right? I think it should be it shouldn't be somewhere where this is the only skyscraper, for example, but it should be among skyscrapers to have neighbors and to really have a different kind of approach to a building that is not necessarily an island in the city where nobody can go into, but really a kind of a welcoming gesture within other skyscrapers. I think then it really draws the contrast that we were going for. So as well for this one, there are some ideas where it would fit perfectly, but life isn't always like this. So,
Right.
and architecture, I think, is the art of the compromise. And I think that if it really gets developed somewhere, that's a compromise we can live with.
Right. Okay. And that's my next question is about compromise, which is great. Because and thinking about the farmhouse, there is a universal quality of sustainability in your aesthetic. And I think they can work in any city or any mountainous context in terms of bird, because architecture theory is evolving an aesthetic of sustainability, and you guys are at the forefront of that, meaning architecture that creates an experience or a liveliness that relates to our understanding of place and nature, rather than necessarily striving for LEED Gold XYZ, more focusing on the experiential qualities of place and earth. But there is a compromise to be talked about, and you did get into it, which is like, we don't have that much time left with carbon and material use, and just the carbon footprint and the material use of architects, our building culture is, astronomical. So where does that compromise live for you guys? And if you could just expand on that conversation, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, I think that maybe that is also the strong part about self-initiated projects, that you give already a certain direction for a project that just draws the clients who really wants that, right? I think that nobody contacted us and said, hey, we love the farmhouse. Can we build this in concrete or steel? This was never a question we got, right? So it was always, we love wood buildings. The farmhouse would be perfect to build. So I think it already selects the clients you would love to work with, from the clients that you have to make compromises that you actually don't want to make in a project like this. But there are for sure compromises, for example, in size. I think that the farmhouse looks great in the dimension it is at the moment, right? It is a quite heavy footprint in its dimension. So it also needs to have a certain height that it somehow balances it out a little bit. But I'm not sure if we, for example, on the site in Berlin, I'm quite sure we won't achieve that, right? So I think there are a lot of compromises to make there. But I think, it doesn't really matter so much, because the height of a building, this has more of it's probably more of a superficial how do you say, how it looks, right? That you want to have this, how it looks. So it's a bit superficial thinking. But I think there are much more statements that are to the core of the building, right? How it works internally. How can this circular economy within a building really work? So I think these are much more interesting questions to solve, and I think that's what you also meant with the design of sustainability. That it has a kind of a beauty to it, because it is it somehow follows this circular economy, what plants are going through and where plants need to sit in a building and how they get watered and so forth. So I think it creates there a certain beauty that is not superficial, but really the essence of the building itself.
Mm. And so how does it change? Like, well, I don't know where you intended for the farmhouse to be located, but how does climate of Berlin change to design? Are those to become greenhouses or with
Yes,
glass?
they are right. They are conceptual as greenhouses. Yes.
Oh, okay.
So
they won't be open air.
Yeah. No, it won't be. No. And my first thought was that, you know, for sure the small structures they would be, but for a tower this wouldn't make sense to keep them open. So they can have different climates. You can create different plants, different vegetables to grow and so forth. Yeah. So they are fully independent greenhouses. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And then a question maybe that you've been getting a lot recently, but I'm still curious to ask myself is I think a lot about my relationship to urban systems and my relationship to being in an urban context while designing. And I'm curious how you think you have changed or your design process has changed, you know, moving back to Austria from Beijing. Do architects need to be in the context that they're designing for? Is it important for them to be embedded in the context, or how do you feel about? It seems, sorry, yeah, I don't need to go on. How has your design process changed? How have you changed?
Yeah, I think like one thing that changed is for sure that we became more focused on what we are working. I think in our time in Beijing, you know, you are then getting invited to a lot of events. You have to be at some openings of exhibitions, and you're invited to a lot of things that distract you a little bit of the work you want to create. And a lot of this is also unnecessary. And a lot of, you know, I'm not the most social person anyways. So I didn't really enjoy to go to those things. So I think that in the mountain, we are much more focused on projects. But I think what also changed is a little bit the dynamic we have to our clients, like towards our clients, because now we are in a place where we have to be found by our clients. So they have to put some effort in, you know, to get to us. It's not just, okay, let's just walk into the door and check what those guys up to, and if they have some capabilities to work on our project, right? If they're in the same town or so. But they need to, you know, drive a long way, and then when it's winter, they need to go up the mountain, and then, you know, reach our office. So they already put a little bit of effort into it to find us. And I think that there is also something in the psychology of humans that when you discover something, it creates a very personal bond to you, right? So for example, I don't know, if you're in a city and you lost your phone or so, or it doesn't have batteries, and you find a really nice cafe somewhere in a hidden street, right? And you remember that, right? Because, you know, it wasn't Google who guided you there, or like Foursquare who or another app who creates a lot of positive comments on it, but you found it, and this creates such a personal bond to that, and that maybe it's a little bit the same as well then to clients, right? They put effort in, and now they are sitting here in the mountain, this beautiful scenery. We sometimes go with the client, for a hike to talk about projects. So it's, I think, a much different setup than we would have in the city, and it creates a much different relation as well with the client. I would say a much more trusting one, because it's a very in the mountains, everything is very personal, and it somehow caters to that. And I guess that also for the projects then that we work on, they feel more personal. I think, before, I don't know, during university, you try to, any one of us, sounded like a lot of voices that have been heard before, right? When we start studying and we try a lot of things and they look like, Saha and big and so, but it takes then some time, and most of the time it takes to go back to your roots, to somehow find your own voice then you want to talk with. And I think that is the same when you watch all of those, what is this show on Netflix? The Chef's Table, for example. Yeah, so all of the chefs, right? It's always the same story, that they had to go back and looking at their own culture and created something through their own culture, right? They had to find their own roots to be able to cook something special. And I think the same is as well true to us, right? So we somehow also had to go back to the mountain and created these roots then as well for our studio. And therefore, I guess the project also feel much more personal.
Yeah, and so are you doing? I know you mentioned that you do have a lot of client-based work, in tandem with your speculative projects that get a lot. So, what's something that you're working on now? Maybe you can't. What's something that you can talk about that you're working on right now that you're excited about?
Yeah,
client-based in Austria.
Yeah, so I think that that our main project for the last 3 years was BIRD. Like, we mainly work in this, that we have per year maybe 5 main projects, or 3 to 5 main projects. So very little amount of projects, but these ones we heavily concentrated on. And BIRD was a lot of development work. So I would say for the last 2 years, we focused a lot on BIRD. And we did as well some other projects, but BIRD, I think, was somehow our main project through this, through starting our office and the last 2 years. I think this year and next year, our main project is in Portugal. It's with a German client. It's a little hotel on a wonderful site. And it's a really special project. I cannot talk too much about it, but there are so many. It's such a collaborative effort, this project. There are from climate designers to gardeners, to wood building experts, to rammed earth experts, to Transolar, who calculate how much solar panels they need, what the water circulation is. And, all of this stuff is so fully thought out that, it could be really the most ecological project, or at least that I can imagine, right, coming from our office. So in this sense, we started the design, and then so many of these different specialists came into the project, and that made the project so much better. Where it is now, and this was for us as well such a great opportunity to learn so many things, and I think that this one excites me a lot, this project.
That sounds great. Yeah, I love the materials.
And a lot of from Rammed Earth, Martin Rauch. I don't know if this name sounds familiar, but he's probably the best expert in Rammed Earth. there is in the world. He's also from Austria. He's from Vorarlberg. He's part of the project. Yeah, wood building experts, and yeah, it's really a fantastic collaboration. This project.
Yeah, that sounds really great. And then my last question to you, and then I'll let you wrap up your night. Is you talk so much about burnout for architecture, young architects, and architecture students. So, what would be your 30-second advice to young architecture students experiencing burnout?
I don't know. I think I'm a bit young to give advice.
Maybe so.
Don't believe any advice I would give. No, but I mean, I think that there is something true to it that that you need to sound like a lot of other people in order to learn the craft, right? But I think architecture becomes really thrilling once you find your own voice in this sense. And this can happen through a lot of different ways. And architecture is now so diverse that everyone can find their niche, right? That with different tools, with different softwares. There are so many ways now to create an impact then in this niche that you find for yourself, that this one can change as well architecture in a bigger scale. And yeah, so we find our niche here in the mountain, and we try to work on some ecological projects. And it seemed, that the world now in the last 10 years really somehow shifts towards that, right? Even more so through the pandemic, that healthy buildings become much more important for the city of tomorrow, probably. So, and this one then maybe also, if you're lucky, this turn of events also caters to the niche that you are sitting in. And yeah, so I guess, there is, before losing hope, I think, there is somewhere a niche for, I think, every one of us. So not everyone needs to be, having the biggest office or being even doing even buildings. There's much more to architecture than creating houses.
Well said. That's very nice. Okay, well, Chris, great lecture today.
Steven,
I really
thanks,
appreciate
Steve.
you, and thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me. Again, this is
Thank
Chris
you.
from
Same here.
Precht. Okay.
Bye, Steven. Bye-bye.
Bye, Chris.